If you've been on the internet for any length of time, you've probably heard two competing narratives. One says masculinity is the problem. The other says men must wake up, reject the comforting lies of feminism, and adapt to the world as it truly is. But both are missing something fundamental. And if you give me a few minutes, I'll explain exactly what that is. Let me set the background. To understand why the Red Pill movement appeals to men, we first have to understand the cultural story that is reacting against. According to that story, men are considered the problem in society. Women are boosted in education, sports, military service, and politics. Now, perhaps long ago, there was an argument to be made for equality, to give women a fair shake in a male-dominated world. But that argument has long since gone off the rails, leaving men in the dust. In fact, if you're a man, you probably already know the results of the last 50 years of what some would argue is a female-centric culture. In short, we are the expendables. We take the hard jobs, keep the essential systems in society functioning, and are often treated as though our value depends entirely upon what we can provide. Meanwhile, institutions that once sought to remove what many saw to be genuine barriers for women increasingly seem comfortable ignoring the boys and men who are simply falling behind. Initiative is punished, and the world has been pretty much explored. So the most adventurous thing a man can do in our early adult years is to surprise the love of our life with a kiss. That we have to ask permission from first, because the culture has taken the concept of consent to distorted, inconsistent lengths. As a result, a movement has sprung up online known as the Red Pill. And just like the Matrix, it tells men to wake up from the dream and know that, unlike women, men are not born with innate social value. They must build it through competence, strength, attractiveness, status, and money. It reminds men of their nature to build, to invent, and to destroy. It counters the idea that the ultimate goal is to marry a strong, independent woman with a career and make some lopsided cooperative in a house with children, only for her to divorce him later and take everything away that he strives so hard to build. At its most constructive, Red Pill tells men to be disciplined, physically capable, socially aware, and financially independent. But pushed to its logical extreme, it can reduce marriage to risk management, women to incentives, and masculinity to status, wealth, and sexual access. One path is a progressive or feminist culture. It teaches a fairy tale vision of the world that can't possibly exist, a utopia where men and women are equal in purpose, capability, and opportunity. It tells men to deny the differences written in nature. In the other path, the Red Pill tells men to recognize those differences and to use them to win, to excel, to conquer. But it often leaves unanswered the most important question: conquer what, and for whose benefit? Is it simply to rise above other men? Is it to establish dominance? Or is it to accumulate wealth and influence for one's own gain? But before you lies a third path, one that recognizes nature without worshiping it. A path where man is not merely called to optimize and indulge his appetites, but rather he is called to govern them and to build with the opposite sex rather than treating women as competitors or prizes. To forge a future together with one complementing the other. One man, one woman, united for life. That third path is the Christian or conservative understanding of manhood. It has more of men. It requires sacrifice, but it is the path desperately needed in our culture to stop society from descending any more into madness, disunity, and division. This path is a call to duty. It demands a man learn his place in his family, society, and country, and sacrifice for the future without the need for thanks. It is the idea that service is what commands respect, a service under a higher moral law. Progressivism correctly recognizes that society should not simply sanctify every inherited hierarchy or impulse. Not every tradition is worth keeping. Not every law is worth maintaining. The Red Pill is correct that denying human nature doesn't just make it disappear. Both have an element of truth, but one tries to abolish nature while the other risks enthroning it. But the correct answer, my friend, is neither. Let me give a more practical example. I married my Christian college sweetheart, song maternal. I wasn't trying to calculate her dating history, manipulate attraction, or protect myself through endless post-marriage contingency plans. We have both been taught that marriage was permanent, that children are a blessing, and that fidelity was not merely a preference, but an obligation. She wanted children, so did I. So not only did I avoid the dating pitfalls and picking the right place, but I also found a woman instantly steeped in higher values, in spite of the culture. I didn't overcome the dating environment by mastering its rules. I simply stepped outside of those rules and chose an environment, a woman, and a shared faith that was oriented towards marriage, fidelity, and children. You see, conservatism, which is rooted in Christianity, both teach the world as it is and inspire man to act in spite of his nature and his surroundings. That's what Red Pill lacks, because Red Pill teaches the world doesn't care about men unless they produce something of value, and that's largely correct. But that value shouldn't be merely of earthly goods and fancies. That actually sets men up to fail, because not all are capable of that kind of success. Many, I'd say even most, will fail and not find the freedom they seek, leaving them with no other recourse to find that success. And the even deeper problem is that many of those who succeed will eventually discover that those things, the wealth, the status, the sexual success, cannot tell them what their strength is for. Those cannot properly define masculinity. Those are merely things that have no eternal or moral value. Conservatism and the foundation of it, which is Christianity, does not merely console the unsuccessful. It judges success itself. It asks whether wealth serves a family, whether power protects the weak, and whether discipline has produced virtue or merely appetite under control. I have a wife that I love, and 2 boys, a place in my church, and a life rooted in responsibilities larger than myself. I didn't get that by being red-pilled. I didn't get that by being the weak, feminine man that the world would desire me to be. I did that by taking the success that my parents gave me, in mind and in spirit, and continuing to replicate those lessons forward, even after I left home. Think of the Tate brothers. The Tates embody what the world will consider a highly visible form of masculine success: wealth, confidence, physical strength, influence, and access to women. Those achievements are real, but they're carnal achievements. They tell us that a man has learned to dominate the marketplace, but not that he's learned to govern himself, remain faithful, raise children, serve a community, or submit his power under a moral law. The things that we need to run a society, a civilization even. It may be more realistic than the progressive utopia, yes, but realism alone does not make something moral. It's merely resetting back to how things used to be before our landscape was transformed by moral laws. Red Pill does not promote the formation of civilization. It's an acknowledgement of the animalistic nature of genders and success, which again is better than a non-existent progressive utopia. But better is not always best, and it's not always right. Because the truth is, men are to lead not just in career building and success, but rather, for a man to be a pillar in the community, it takes a discernment of a proper moral foundation. So if I could leave with you one thing, whether you're progressive, red-pilled, or merely someone who happened upon this video, take a step back. And when the culture offers you the denial of nature or the worship of nature, take neither. We must understand that the prosperity of the West was built upon Christianity, moral restraint, sacrifice, and inherited duty. Just as my parents passed on their lessons to me, it is now my duty to pass those lessons on to my children so that they too can be successful. And in turn, it will be their duty to pass it on to their children, so on and so forth, into the future. Because those foundations, those moral foundations that built this country, that built the West, are now crumbling, and the responsibility for preserving what remains has now passed on to you. Dear friend, do not fail our future. Now, if you like this kind of content, let me know. And if you're interested in bigger questions of culture, morality, and civilization, well, that's what this entire channel is about. Literally, I can't shut up about it. So if that sounds interesting to you, consider subscribing. But whether this is your first time here or you're a returning viewer, thanks for stopping by, and well, I'll see you again next time. Bye!